The summer sun was shining bright over Windsor Castle that morning. A young woman from California had just arrived, her excitement practically bubbling over. She'd been counting down the days to this trip for almost a year, saving every penny from her marketing job to make it happen. England wasn't just another stop on her journey. It was the dream destination she'd been posting about for months. She stood there with her phone held high, taking in the magnificent view. The castle walls towered above her, centuries of history embedded in every stone. Tourists from all corners of the world shuffled around, cameras clicking, voices chattering in a dozen different languages. Everyone seemed genuinely amazed by the grandeur of it all. The morning air was crisp and perfect, exactly how she'd imagined it would be. Her social media accounts had been building up to this moment. Every airport selfie, every hotel room photo, every meal she'd eaten on this trip had been carefully documented and shared. Her followers had been eating it up, leaving comments like "so jealous" and "living your best life." This wasn't just a vacation for her. It was content. It was engagement. It was building her online presence one post at a time. The ornate gates of the castle gleamed in the sunlight. Gold accents caught her eye from every angle. She'd seen pictures online, of course, but being here in person was something else entirely. The architecture was breathtaking, the kind of thing you only see in movies or history books. She felt like she'd stepped back in time, except she had her smartphone and a portable charger in her designer purse. Then she spotted them, the royal guards, standing perfectly still in their bright red uniforms with those tall, fuzzy black hats that looked almost comically oversized. She'd heard about them, seen them in countless tourist photos, but seeing them in real life was different. They looked like toy soldiers come to life, standing at attention without so much as a blink. She couldn't help but smile. This was exactly the kind of unique content her followers would love. Other tourists were taking photos, sure, but they were keeping their distance. Respectful poses from several feet away, quick snapshots before moving along. That wasn't her style, though. She didn't fly thousands of miles to take the same boring pictures everyone else had. She wanted something memorable, something that would really pop on her feed, something that would get shares and comments and maybe even go viral. The guard she focused on stood like a statue. His face was completely emotionless, eyes fixed straight ahead as if staring into another dimension. His rifle was positioned perfectly, not a centimeter out of place. Everything about him screamed discipline and precision. To her, though, he just looked like the perfect backdrop for something fun and different. She'd read somewhere that these guards weren't supposed to move or react, no matter what. They were trained to ignore tourists, to stand there through rain, heat, annoying kids, whatever came their way. That made them even more perfect for what she had in mind. A living, breathing prop that wouldn't ruin her shot by moving or telling her to stop. The castle grounds were getting more crowded as the morning went on. Tour groups gathered around guides holding up colorful umbrellas. Families posed for pictures. A street performer somewhere in the distance played traditional British music. It was the kind of scene that felt almost magical, steeped in tradition and history. Everyone around her seemed to be soaking in that history with a sense of respect and wonder. But she had something else in mind. She wanted her moment to stand out. She wanted people to stop scrolling through their feeds and actually pay attention to her post. In her mind, she was being creative, thinking outside the box. She wasn't trying to be disrespectful. She just wanted to have fun, to create something entertaining that her friends back home would laugh at and share. Looking around, she noticed a few warning signs posted near the guards, something about maintaining distance and respecting the personnel on duty. She glanced at them for barely a second before dismissing them. Those signs were probably just formalities, she thought. Nobody really enforced that stuff, right? Tourists got close to these guards all the time in the videos she'd seen online. Her friends had wandered off to check out the gift shop, which was fine by her. She worked better alone anyway, without anyone trying to tell her what to do or how to act. This was her moment, her content, her chance to create something that would get attention. She took a deep breath, checked her hair and her phone's camera, and started walking toward the guard with a confident smile on her face. The cobblestones felt solid under her feet. The castle loomed even larger up close, and that guard, still as a statue, seemed almost unreal in his stillness. She couldn't wait to see the look on everyone's faces when she posted what she was about to do. This was going to be good. This was going to be worth every mile she'd traveled. Or at least that's what she thought in that moment, completely unaware of how wrong she was about to be. Her thumb hovered over the record button on her phone. The perfect shot was just seconds away. Everything was falling into place exactly as she'd imagined. The lighting was perfect, the background was stunning, and she had the perfect idea for a post that would blow up her notifications. She pressed record and started walking closer to the guard, a playful grin spreading across her face. This was it. Her moment of internet fame was about to begin, though not at all in the way she expected. She stepped closer to the guard, her phone held out in front of her at the perfect angle. The red record button was glowing, capturing everything. In her mind, this was going to be hilarious. Just a bit of harmless fun that would make people smile. She'd seen dozens of videos like this before, tourists doing silly things near famous landmarks. Why should this be any different? The guard remained completely still. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement crossed his face. His eyes stared straight ahead, focused on some invisible point in the distance. To her, this was confirmation that her plan would work. He wasn't going to react. He couldn't react. That was the whole point of these guards, wasn't it? To stand there and look impressive while tourists did their thing. She started with something simple. A basic pose next to him, standing at attention with her hand raised in a mock salute. A few other tourists glanced over, some smiling at her antics. That small bit of attention felt good. It encouraged her to keep going, to push things a little further. If a simple pose got a few smiles, imagine what something more creative would do. Moving around to face the guard, she mimicked his stance. Chest out, shoulders back, chin up, trying to copy that serious expression on his face. She held the pose for a few seconds, then broke into laughter. It was impossible to keep a straight face while standing like that. How did these guards do it all day? The absurdity of it struck her as genuinely funny. A small group of tourists had stopped to watch now. A couple of them were chuckling, which only fueled her confidence. This was working. People were paying attention. Her content was landing exactly how she wanted. She could already imagine the comment section filling up with laughing emojis and friends tagging each other. But the simple poses weren't enough anymore. She needed something better, something that would really grab attention. That's when she decided to get more daring. She stepped even closer to the guard, close enough that she was definitely inside that invisible boundary of personal space, close enough that any normal person would have reacted, stepped back, or said something. She waved her hand in front of his face slowly at first, then with more exaggerated movements. Nothing, not even a blink. This was perfect. She turned to the small crowd that had gathered and made a comment about him being a robot, a statue, not even real. A few people laughed nervously. Others looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. Encouraged by the reaction, she kept going. She pretended to inspect his uniform, pointing at different parts of it while making exaggerated expressions of curiosity. She circled around him like he was an exhibit in a museum, narrating the whole thing for her video. Her voice grew louder, more animated. She was performing now, not just for her phone camera, but for the growing audience of tourists who had stopped to watch. Some people in the crowd started to look genuinely concerned. A few whispered to each other, pointing at the signs that clearly stated tourists should maintain a respectful distance. An older couple shook their heads and walked away, clearly disapproving of what they were seeing. But she didn't notice. Or if she did notice, she didn't care. She was too caught up in the moment, too focused on creating her perfect viral video. She started making jokes about the guard's hat, calling it oversized and funny-looking. She wondered aloud if there was actually a person under there or just a mannequin. Each comment was meant to be funny, to entertain her audience, but there was an edge to it now. A mocking tone that crossed from playful into something less innocent. Then she called out to her friends who had just returned from the gift shop. They were standing at the edge of the crowd looking mortified. She waved them over, asking them to record from a different angle. One of them reluctantly pulled out their phone, though the expression on their face showed clear discomfort with the situation. The other friend tried to quietly suggest they should probably leave, but the suggestion fell on deaf ears. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She had been testing boundaries, pushing limits, but she'd still maintained a tiny bit of distance. Now, emboldened by what she perceived as success, she decided to go further. She reached out her hand, moving it toward the guard's uniform as if to touch it. Her fingers extended inches away from the bright red fabric. In that moment, several things happened at once. A security officer who had been watching from a distance started moving quickly toward her. A few tourists gasped. Someone in the crowd said, "Oh no," loud enough for others to hear. But she was oblivious to all of it, focused entirely on her performance, on getting that perfect shot that would make everyone talk. Her hand moved closer. She was saying something to the camera about testing if the guard was real. The crowd had grown larger now, maybe 20 or 30 people watching this unfold. Some had their own phones out, recording what they were witnessing. The atmosphere had shifted from amused to tense, though she hadn't picked up on it yet. The security officer was almost there, moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. His face was serious, professional, the face of someone who had dealt with situations like this before. He could see where this was heading, could predict what was about to happen. He'd seen it play out dozens of times with tourists who thought the rules didn't apply to them, but he wasn't going to make it in time. She was already too close, already too far over the line. Her hand was extended, her attitude was cavalier, and her awareness of the actual situation was practically zero. She thought she was being clever and entertaining. She thought the worst that could happen was someone would ask her to leave. She had no idea that these guards, despite their stillness, were highly trained soldiers. She had no idea they had protocols for exactly this kind of situation. The guard's eyes, which had seemed so distant and unfocused, were actually tracking everything. He was aware of her every movement, every step closer, every gesture. His training had taught him to remain still, yes, but also to know exactly when that stillness needed to break. And that moment was coming very, very soon. She was smiling at her camera, her hand now just centimeters from his uniform, completely confident that nothing would happen. After all, nothing had happened yet, right? She'd been pushing boundaries for several minutes and gotten away with all of it. Why would this be any different? That confidence, that certainty that she was in control of the situation, was about to shatter in the most dramatic way possible. The crowd held its breath. The security officer quickened his pace, and the guard, still appearing motionless, was ready to do exactly what his training demanded. The security officer reached her just in time. His hand gently but firmly touched her shoulder, stopping her forward movement. She jumped slightly, startled out of her focused concentration on getting the perfect shot. When she turned around, there was a flash of annoyance on her face. Someone was interrupting her content creation, and she clearly wasn't happy about it. The officer was professional and polite, exactly as his training dictated. He spoke in a calm, measured tone that carried authority without being aggressive. He explained that she needed to step back from the guard immediately. He gestured to the clearly posted signs that outlined the rules for tourist behavior around the Royal Guards. His words were clear and simple. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a requirement. She looked at him with an expression that mixed irritation with dismissal. Her body language said it all, the way she shifted her weight, the slight roll of her eyes, the forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She heard what he was saying, but she wasn't really listening, not in the way that mattered. To her, this was just someone being overly serious about something that wasn't a big deal. The officer continued, explaining that the guards weren't props or statues. They were active-duty military personnel performing an important job. They deserved respect, and there were rules in place for very good reasons. He wasn't being mean or aggressive, just clear and firm. This was obviously something he'd had to explain many times before to tourists who didn't understand or didn't care about protocol. She nodded slowly, that fake understanding look plastered on her face. Sure, she got it. No problem. She even said sorry, though the word came out flat and insincere. It was the kind of apology you give when you just want someone to stop talking, so you can get back to what you were doing. The officer watched her carefully, trying to gauge whether his message had actually gotten through. Taking a few steps backward, she created some distance between herself and the guard. The officer seemed satisfied with this and offered a slight nod before turning to walk away. He had other areas to monitor, other tourists to keep an eye on. His job was to prevent incidents, not to babysit one person all day. He'd given the warning. Now it was up to her to follow it. But the moment his back was turned, something shifted in her expression. That fake compliance melted away, replaced by a look of defiance mixed with amusement. She glanced at her friends, who were still standing there looking uncomfortable. One of them whispered that maybe they should just go, that this wasn't worth it. The other nodded in agreement, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but here. She shook her head and smiled. No way she'd come all this way. She'd planned this content. Some security guard wasn't going to ruin her perfect video. Besides, what was the worst that could happen? They'd ask her to leave? Big deal. She'd already gotten some good footage. Might as well get a little more before calling it quits. Looking around to make sure the officer wasn't watching, she took a small step forward. Then another. The guard remained motionless, unchanged by the brief intervention. In her mind, this confirmed her theory. Nothing was going to happen. These guards really couldn't do anything. The security officer was just being overly cautious, probably had to give that speech to tourists all day long, even though it didn't really matter. A few people in the crowd noticed her moving closer again. Some exchanged concerned glances. Others pulled out their phones, sensing that something interesting might be about to happen. There's a certain energy that builds when people sense drama coming, and that energy was definitely present now. The air felt charged with anticipation. She started talking to her camera again, but this time with a different tone. There was an edge of rebellion in her voice now. She made a comment about how uptight the rules were, how people needed to lighten up. It was just a picture, just a video. Nobody was getting hurt. Why did everything have to be so serious all the time? Her friends tried one more time to convince her to stop. They could see where this was heading, could feel the tension building, but she waved them off with a laugh. They were being paranoid, worrying too much. This was fine. Everything was fine. She was in control of the situation. Moving even closer to the guard now, she was back to almost exactly where she'd been before the officer intervened, maybe even a little closer. The guard's expression remained unchanged, his posture perfect, his eyes fixed on that distant point. To anyone watching, he seemed completely unaware of her presence. But that was the illusion, the training, the discipline that made these guards so famous. She made a comment to her audience about how nothing was happening. See? All that fuss for nothing. She even laughed about the security officer, mimicking his serious tone in a mocking way. Some people in the crowd laughed nervously. Others looked genuinely worried. A woman near the front whispered to her husband that someone should do something, that this wasn't going to end well. Then she said something that would later haunt her when she watched the videos back. She looked directly at her camera and announced with absolute confidence that these guards weren't allowed to move no matter what. They were just for show, she claimed. Trained to stand there and take it, no matter what tourists did. It was all part of the job, part of the attraction. That statement hung in the air like a challenge. She truly believed it. Every video she'd seen online, every article she'd skimmed, had reinforced this idea. Royal Guards stood still. That was their thing. That was what made them special and interesting. The idea that they might actually respond, actually react, actually do something, hadn't seriously entered her mind. Emboldened by her own words, she decided to go for the ultimate shot. She positioned herself right next to the guard, so close that they were almost touching. She held up her phone for a selfie, making exaggerated facial expressions. Then she pretended to whisper to him, her face inches from his, asking if anyone was home in there. The crowd had grown significantly now. At least 40 or 50 people were watching, a mix of curious tourists and concerned onlookers. Phones were everywhere, recording from multiple angles. What had started as one person's attempt at viral content had become a spectacle, a moment that everyone sensed was building towards something. She reached out again, her confidence at its peak. This time her hand moved toward the guard's uniform with certainty, not hesitation. She was going to touch it, going to prove her point, going to get that ultimate shot that would make all of this worthwhile. Her fingers extended, moving through the air with casual arrogance. The security officer, alerted by someone in the crowd, was heading back in their direction. But he was too far away, moving through the thick crowd of tourists. He could see what was happening, could see where this was going, but there was no way he'd reach her in time. His professional expression had shifted to one of resignation. He knew what came next. He'd seen it before. The guard's eyes, still fixed forward, had tracked every movement. His training had taught him patience, stillness, and control. But it had also taught him something else. When to break that stillness, when to assert authority, when to defend his post and his person. That moment had arrived. The line had been crossed too many times. The warnings had been ignored. Now there would be consequences, swift and shocking, that would change everything in an instant. It happened so fast that most people didn't even process it at first. One moment the guard was perfectly still, a statue in red and black. The next moment, everything exploded into motion and sound. His right foot came down on the cobblestones with a force that seemed impossible. The sound echoed off the castle walls like a gunshot, sharp and explosive. The impact was so powerful that people standing several feet away felt the vibration through the ground. It wasn't just a step. It was a statement, a display of controlled power that cut through every conversation, every camera click, every whispered comment. But the stomp was only the beginning. In the same fluid motion, the guard's voice erupted from his chest. It wasn't talking. It wasn't even shouting in the normal sense. It was a military command, bellowed with the full force of trained authority. The words came out like a physical force, echoing across the castle grounds loud enough that people hundreds of feet away turned to look. The command was simple and direct, a warning to step back, delivered with such intensity that it felt like thunder. His voice carried centuries of military discipline, the weight of tradition and the unmistakable authority of someone who absolutely meant what they said. Every syllable was pronounced with perfect clarity despite the volume, each word designed to shock and command immediate obedience. She never saw it coming. One second she was reaching out, confident and smiling. The next second her entire body reacted on pure instinct. Her hand jerked back as if she'd touched a hot stove. Her eyes went wide with shock, pupils dilating. Her mouth opened in surprise, but no sound came out at first. The transformation from cocky confidence to pure fear happened in less than a heartbeat. Her phone flew from her hand. It spun through the air in what felt like slow motion, the screen catching the sunlight as it tumbled. Then it hit the cobblestones with a sickening crack. The protective case did nothing to prevent the screen from shattering, spiderweb cracks spreading across the glass. The phone skidded a few more feet before coming to rest, the camera still recording everything from its new position on the ground. She stumbled backward, her feet scrambling for purchase on the smooth stones. Her designer bag swung wildly from her shoulder. For a moment it looked like she might actually fall, her balance completely thrown off by the shock. She caught herself at the last second, but the grace and confidence from moments before had vanished completely. Now she just looked terrified and off balance. The guard's eyes were on her now, not staring through her or past her like before, but directly at her. Those eyes blazed with intensity, with authority, with the clear message that he was very much aware and very much in control. His rifle remained perfectly positioned, not a centimeter out of place despite the explosive movement. Every inch of him communicated power, discipline, and zero tolerance for disrespect. The entire interaction had taken maybe 3 seconds from start to finish. 3 seconds that completely shattered the illusion she'd been operating under. 3 seconds that proved beyond any doubt that these guards were not statues or props or background decoration. They were soldiers, trained, alert and fully capable of responding when necessary. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Gasps rippled through the gathered tourists. Several people jumped back themselves, startled by the sudden explosion of sound and movement. A child started crying, frightened by the loud noise. Some people's phones dropped slightly as the shock made them forget they were recording. Everyone was staring now, not at her but at the aftermath of what had just happened. She stood there frozen, about 10 feet back from where she'd been. Her face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Her hands were shaking visibly, trembling like leaves in a strong wind. She looked down at her broken phone lying on the ground, then back at the guard, then at the crowd of people staring at her. The full weight of what had just happened was starting to sink in. The guard had already returned to his position of attention. The entire episode, from his perspective, had been a brief but necessary interruption to his duty. His face was once again expressionless, his eyes fixed forward. But everyone who had witnessed what just happened knew better now. They understood that the stillness was a choice, not an inability. The discipline was real, but so was the readiness to act when needed. A heavy silence hung over the crowd. It was the kind of silence that feels thick and uncomfortable, where everyone knows something significant just happened, but nobody quite knows what to do next. People looked at each other with wide eyes, sharing that universal expression of, "Did you just see that?" Then slowly, gradually, the whispers started. Low conversations between couples and friends. Comments passed in hushed tones. The energy had completely changed from amused curiosity to something more serious. Several people were shaking their heads. Others wore expressions of second-hand embarrassment. A few looked satisfied, as if justice had been served. She finally moved, bending down to pick up her broken phone with trembling hands. The screen was badly cracked, but it was still recording. She fumbled with it for a moment before managing to stop the video. When she looked at the damaged screen, her expression crumbled further. This wasn't just embarrassing. It was going to be expensive, too. Her friends rushed over, finally stepping in now that the moment had passed. They were talking quickly, urgently, trying to get her to leave. One of them grabbed her arm gently, tugging her away from the scene. The other picked up her bag, which had fallen during her stumbling retreat. Both of them looked mortified, clearly wishing they'd tried harder to stop her earlier. But moving away wasn't as simple as just walking off. The crowd wasn't hostile, but they weren't exactly making a path for her either. She had to navigate through groups of people, feeling dozens of eyes tracking her movement. Some people were still recording, their phones following her retreat. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their disapproval, their satisfaction at seeing someone get what they deserved. As she pushed through the crowd, she heard the comments. They weren't said to her directly, but they were said loud enough for her to hear. Comments about respect, comments about entitled tourists, comments about how people need to learn boundaries. Each word was like a small cut, adding to the overwhelming embarrassment that was washing over her in waves. A British family stood near the edge of the crowd, and as she passed, the father spoke up. His voice was firm but not unkind. He explained more to his own children than to her, that the Queen's Guard are serving soldiers. Many of them have seen combat, have been deployed overseas, have earned the right to wear that uniform. They're not actors or performers. They're doing a real job that deserves real respect. She heard every word. Her face somehow managed to go even more pale. The reality was crashing down on her like a wave. These weren't just guys in costumes standing around for tourist photos. They were actual military personnel, with actual authority, who had actual protocols for dealing with people like her. The weight of her ignorance and disrespect suddenly felt crushing. The security officer had finally reached the area. He assessed the situation quickly, taking in the broken phone, the shaken tourist, and the stirred-up crowd. He didn't look angry, just tired. This was his job, dealing with incidents like this. He made sure she was okay. No injuries from her stumbling retreat, then strongly suggested it was time for her to move on from this area. She nodded mutely, unable to form words. Her voice had abandoned her completely. All that confidence, all those jokes, all that performance energy had evaporated in an instant. Now she just wanted to disappear, to be anywhere but here, to escape the stares and whispers and the crushing weight of her own embarrassment and regret. What she didn't know, couldn't have known in that moment of overwhelming embarrassment, was that her worst nightmare was already unfolding. Multiple tourists had been recording the entire encounter from different angles. Some had started filming when they noticed her initial antics. Others had pulled out their phones when they sensed something was about to happen. A few had caught the whole thing from start to finish, from her first mocking poses to that explosive moment of instant regret. The first video went online within minutes. A family from Germany had captured everything on their phone, and the father uploaded it to social media while still standing at the castle. He didn't think much of it at first. Just an interesting moment from their vacation, something to share with friends back home. He added a simple caption about respecting the guards and hit post. The response was immediate and explosive. Within the first hour, the video had been viewed thousands of times. Within 2 hours, that number had climbed into the tens of thousands. People were sharing it across platforms, sending it to friends, posting it to their own accounts. The algorithm picked it up, recognizing the engagement and pushing it to more and more feeds. A teenager from Japan had recorded from a different angle, capturing her face more clearly during the moment of shock. That video went up on a different platform and it too started spreading rapidly. Then a third video appeared. This one from an older couple from Australia who had been standing to the side. Their footage showed the perfect view of her stumbling backward, phone flying from her hand. By the time she and her friends had made it away from the castle grounds and found a nearby cafe, the videos were already going viral. They sat in a corner booth, hands wrapped around cups of tea they weren't drinking, trying to process what had just happened. Her phone, with its cracked screen, kept buzzing with notifications. At first she ignored them, too shaken to care. But the buzzing was constant, insistent, demanding attention. Finally she looked. Her social media accounts were exploding, but not in the way she'd hoped. Hundreds of notifications, then thousands. Her follower count was indeed going up, but for all the wrong reasons. People weren't following her because they liked her content. They were following to see the train wreck, to watch the fallout, to be part of the drama. The videos were everywhere. She scrolled through her feed with growing horror, seeing her own face repeated dozens of times across different posts. Each video had been viewed tens of thousands of times, some even more. The comment sections were already filling up, and they were absolutely brutal. People weren't holding back. They were saying exactly what they thought, and none of it was kind. One video had a caption that read, "When keeping it real goes wrong." It had been shared over 5,000 times in just a few hours. Another was titled "Instant Karma at its Finest" and had racked up 3 million views. A third used the caption "Tourist learns a hard lesson about respect" and was climbing in popularity by the minute. Each post painted her as the villain, the entitled tourist who got exactly what she deserved. Her friends sat across from her, watching her face grow more and more pale as she scrolled. They'd tried to warn her. They'd seen this coming. But there was no satisfaction in being right, only a deep sympathy for what their friend was going through. This was beyond embarrassing. This was a digital nightmare unfolding in real time. The video showed everything: her mocking poses, her dismissive attitude toward the security officer, her decision to move closer again after being warned, the moment her hand reached out, and then that explosive response from the guard, her terrified reaction, the phone flying, the stumbling retreat. Every humiliating second was captured in high definition from multiple angles. People were analyzing the videos frame by frame. Someone had created a compilation showing all 3 major angles synced together. Another person had added slow-motion effects to the moment of the stomp, making it look even more dramatic and powerful. A third had put music over it, that classical piece that plays when people make terrible decisions in movies. Comments rolled in by the hundreds every few minutes. People from all over the world were weighing in. Many were former or current military personnel who explained why her behavior was so offensive. Veterans shared stories about the discipline required to be a ceremonial guard. British citizens expressed frustration with tourists who disrespected their traditions. Even people who'd never been to England chimed in with opinions about respecting other cultures. Some comments were trying to be funny, making jokes at her expense. Others were more serious, using her as an example of a larger problem with tourist behavior. A few were defending her, saying the response was too harsh. But those were quickly drowned out by the overwhelming majority, who felt she'd gotten exactly what she deserved. The videos had spread beyond just regular social media users. News aggregator sites had picked them up. Tourism blogs were featuring them as examples of what not to do. Travel influencers were using her incident as a teaching moment for their own followers. Even some news outlets were starting to take notice, requesting permission to use the footage in their reporting. She started recognizing comments from people she knew. Friends from back home had seen the videos. Coworkers were commenting. Even her boss had somehow stumbled across one of the posts. The horror of this realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just going to be an embarrassing travel story. This was going to follow her home into her real life, her workplace, her relationships. Her own video, the one she'd been recording, was still on her broken phone. She thought about uploading it herself, trying to control the narrative somehow. But one look at the comments on the existing videos told her that wouldn't help. People weren't interested in her side of the story. They'd already decided what this was about, and her perspective wouldn't change their minds. The notifications kept coming. People were tagging her in the videos. Friends were sending her links, asking if this was really her. Strangers were finding her accounts and leaving comments. Some were sending direct messages, ranging from concerned to cruel. Her phone was basically unusable now. Not just because of the cracked screen, but because of the sheer volume of activity. One video in particular was dominating. It had been posted by someone with a large following, which gave it immediate visibility. That video had already surpassed 10 million views and was still climbing. 10 million people had watched her moment of humiliation. 10 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. How could that many people care about one tourist making a mistake? But they did care. The video had tapped into something bigger. Frustration with entitled behavior, satisfaction in seeing consequences delivered swiftly and appropriately, the timeless appeal of instant karma, respect for military personnel and traditions. All of these themes were woven into the comments, making her incident into something larger than just one moment at one castle. Her friends finally convinced her to put the phone away. Looking at it was only making things worse, each scroll bringing fresh waves of horror and embarrassment. But even with the phone face down on the table, she could hear it buzzing. Constant notifications like a swarm of digital bees that wouldn't leave her alone. The cafe around them continued its normal operations. People ordered coffee, ate pastries, chatted about their days. Nobody there had any idea that the young woman in the corner booth was currently going viral for all the wrong reasons. To them, she was just another tourist, maybe having a bad day, nothing special. If only they knew. She thought about deleting her accounts, just wiping everything clean and starting over. But she knew that wouldn't stop the videos already out there. They'd been saved, downloaded, re-uploaded to different platforms. The internet was forever, and her moment of poor judgment was now permanently etched into that forever. The tea in front of her had gone cold. The afternoon sun was shifting, casting different shadows through the cafe windows. Time was passing, but the buzzing phone suggested that online, this was just getting started. The viral moment was spreading, evolving, taking on a life of its own. And she was at the center of it all, watching helplessly as her reputation crumbled in real time across every platform she'd ever used. She finally picked up her broken phone from the cafe table, hands still trembling slightly. The cracked screen made everything harder to see, but she could still make out enough to navigate. She needed to understand what had just happened, needed to grasp why that guard had reacted the way he did. In her mind, she'd just been having fun. She genuinely hadn't understood the severity of what she was doing. Her friends sat quietly, giving her space to process. One of them ordered another round of tea that nobody would drink. The other kept glancing nervously between her and the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and recognize her from the videos. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things they wanted to say but couldn't find the right words for. She started searching online, typing with difficulty on the damaged screen. Articles about the Royal Guard, their history, their training, their purpose. With each sentence she read, the pit in her stomach grew deeper. These weren't ceremonial guards in the way she'd understood that term. Yes, they performed ceremonial duties, but they were active soldiers from elite regiments. The articles explained that many of these guards had served in combat zones. Afghanistan, Iraq, other deployments around the world. They'd seen real action, faced real danger, earned real medals for valor. The uniform they wore at the castle was an honor, a tradition passed down through centuries. Standing guard wasn't some easy job given to rookies. It was a position of pride and responsibility. She read about the training required, the physical demands, the mental discipline, the months of preparation before someone could stand guard at a royal residence. These soldiers had to maintain perfect posture for hours in all weather conditions. They couldn't scratch an itch, wipe away sweat, or even acknowledge discomfort. The level of self-control required was extraordinary. More importantly, she learned that they absolutely had the authority to respond to threats or disrespect. They weren't helpless statues. They were armed soldiers with clear protocols for handling situations just like the one she'd created. The stomp and shout she'd experienced was actually one of the milder responses. If she'd actually made contact, if she'd pushed further, the consequences could have been much more severe. A particular article stopped her cold. It was about a tourist who had grabbed a guard's rifle as a joke a few years back. That person had been immediately detained, arrested, and faced serious legal consequences. The article emphasized that interfering with a guard's weapon was treated as a threat to national security. She felt sick reading it, realizing how close she'd come to making an even worse decision. The comments on that article mirrored what she was seeing on the videos of her own incident. People expressing frustration with tourists who treated guards like props. Military personnel sharing their own experiences with disrespectful behavior. British citizens explaining how important these traditions were to their culture and heritage. The message was consistent and clear. This wasn't okay, and people were tired of it. She found a forum where British locals discussed tourist behavior. The thread was brutal. People shared stories of tourists doing inappropriate things at various historical sites. The Royal Guards came up frequently, with locals expressing genuine anger at how their military personnel were treated by visitors who should know better. One comment particularly stung. They come to our country, disrespect our soldiers, and then act shocked when there are consequences. Her phone buzzed again. A message from her sister back in California. Please tell me this isn't you in these videos. Her family had seen them. Her heart sank even further. She didn't know how to respond, so she didn't. Not yet. She needed to understand the full scope of what she'd done before she could face explanations and apologies to the people who mattered most. British family a few tables over was talking about something on their phone. She heard fragments of the conversation. Another tourist. No respect. Served him right. She couldn't be sure they were talking about her video, but the paranoia was setting in. Every conversation felt like it might be about her. Every glance in her direction felt loaded with recognition and judgment. One of her friends finally spoke up, voice gentle but firm. "You need to understand something. Those guards, they're like the soldiers at Arlington National Cemetery in America. Would you ever think about mocking them? Would you treat them like props?" The comparison hit hard. She would never ever disrespect the guards at Arlington. The very idea was unthinkable. But somehow, being in a foreign country, she'd given herself permission to do exactly that. The full weight of her actions was finally settling in. This wasn't about being uptight or having no sense of humor. This was about basic human respect, about understanding that just because someone stands still doesn't mean they're not real, not important, not deserving of dignity. She'd treated a highly trained soldier like a theme park character, and the internet was rightfully calling her out for it. She thought about her own grandfather, who had served in the military. He'd passed away a few years ago, but she remembered the pride in his voice when he talked about his service. The respect he commanded from others who understood what that uniform meant. If he could see this video of her, the disappointment in his eyes would be unbearable. That realization brought tears that she'd been holding back since the incident. More articles loaded on her cracked screen. Tourism blogs warning visitors about proper behavior at various sites. Travel advisories explaining cultural expectations. Official guidelines from heritage sites about respecting guards and personnel. All the information had been readily available if she'd bothered to look. But she hadn't. She'd been too focused on getting content, on standing out, on being different and memorable. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd wanted to go viral, wanted people to notice her, wanted to create something that would get shared widely. She'd succeeded spectacularly. But instead of being known for something clever or creative, she'd become an example of what not to do. Her face was now attached to entitled tourist behavior, to disrespect, to immediate regret. That wasn't the legacy she'd wanted. A notification popped up. Someone had identified her by name on one of the videos. Her full name tagged in a comment. Then her workplace was mentioned. Then her Instagram handle. The doxing was beginning. Pieces of her real identity being connected to the viral videos. This was spiraling beyond just embarrassing. It was becoming genuinely frightening. Her friends saw her face go white and leaned in to look at the screen. Their expressions mirrored her fear. This had gone from a bad moment to a serious problem. One of them suggested contacting the police, asking what they could do about harassment or threats. The other started looking up lawyers who handled online reputation issues. The vacation that was supposed to be fun and carefree had become a crisis. She finally allowed herself to cry, really cry for the first time since the incident. The tears had been building behind her eyes for hours, and now they came in waves. Her friends moved to sit on either side of her, offering comfort and support. Other cafe patrons glanced over with sympathy, probably assuming she'd received bad news from home. If only it were that simple. The reality check was complete. She understood now fully and painfully what she'd done. She understood why it was wrong. She understood why people were so angry. And she understood that this wasn't going to just blow over or be forgotten. This was a defining moment that would follow her for a long time, possibly forever. The question now wasn't whether she'd made a mistake. It was how she was going to deal with the consequences and whether she could somehow make this right. By that evening, the videos had transcended viral status and entered cultural phenomenon territory. The main video had been viewed over 20 million times. 20 million? The number kept climbing with no signs of slowing down. People were waking up in different time zones and discovering the footage for the first time. Each wave of new viewers brought fresh rounds of comments, shares, and reactions. Major news outlets had picked up the story. Not just entertainment websites or social media blogs, but actual news organizations. They were running segments about it, using it as a jumping-off point for discussions about tourist behavior and cultural respect. Travel experts were being interviewed, weighing in on the incident. Military analysts were explaining the role and authority of ceremonial guards. Her moment of poor judgment had become a teaching moment for millions. The comment sections across all platforms had become sprawling digital forums. Thousands upon thousands of people sharing their thoughts, their experiences, their judgments. Some comments had thousands of likes themselves, becoming almost as viral as the original videos. The internet had formed a collective opinion, and it was overwhelmingly against her. Military veterans were among the most vocal. They shared their own experiences with ceremonial duties, explaining the difficulty and importance of such roles. A former Marine wrote a particularly powerful comment about the discipline required to stand perfectly still while dealing with disrespectful tourists. His comment had been liked over 50,000 times and shared across multiple platforms. "I've stood ceremonial watch," he wrote, "and it takes every ounce of training not to react to people treating you like you're not even human." These guards showed remarkable restraint. She's lucky a loud stomp and verbal warning was all she got. In other circumstances, her behavior could have been treated as a threat with much more serious consequences. British citizens were equally vocal, many expressing frustration that had clearly been building for years. Comment after comment talked about tourists treating their country like a theme park, showing no respect for traditions that meant something deeply important to them. One comment that gained massive traction read, "Imagine someone coming to your country and mocking your military at a national monument. That's what this is. Not funny, not cute, not okay." But it wasn't just British people or military personnel. People from all over the world were chiming in. Japanese commenters talked about similar issues at their temples and shrines. Italians shared stories about tourists behaving poorly at historical sites. Greeks mentioned problems at the Acropolis. The conversation had expanded beyond one incident to become a global discussion about tourism, respect, and cultural sensitivity. Travel influencers were using her video as a cautionary tale. Several popular accounts posted reaction videos, breaking down what she did wrong and what tourists should do instead. These videos were also going viral, piggybacking on the attention her incident had generated. Some were sympathetic, acknowledging that cultural education is important. Others were harsh, suggesting she represented everything wrong with modern tourism. The memes started appearing around dinner time. People with video editing skills were having a field day. Her shocked expression had been turned into countless memes about instant regret. The guard stomp had been edited into various scenarios. Sound bites from the video were being remixed and shared. While some were genuinely funny, each meme felt like another punch to her already bruised ego. A particularly popular meme format used the freeze frame of her reaching toward the guard with the caption, "Top 10 moments before disaster," or "It was at this moment she knew she messed up." These had been shared hundreds of thousands of times, often by people who had no idea who she actually was. She'd become anonymous again, but in the worst way possible. Not a person, just a cautionary tale, a punchline, an example of what not to do. Review bombing started on her social media accounts. People were going through her old posts, leaving critical comments on photos from months or years ago. Every selfie, every vacation photo, every cheerful update was now getting negative attention. Some comments were constructive criticism about cultural sensitivity. Many were just mean, taking the opportunity to tear down someone who'd been publicly humiliated. Her follower count was still growing, but so was the hate. For every supportive message she received, there were dozens that were cruel. Some people were sending her links to articles about proper tourist behavior. Others were sending much worse, messages filled with anger and insults that made her feel physically sick to read. Professional consequences were starting to materialize. Someone had found her LinkedIn profile and connected it to the videos. Comments started appearing there too, more restrained than on other platforms, but no less concerning. People were questioning whether someone with such poor judgment should be in a marketing position. Her company's social media accounts were getting tagged in posts about the incident. A hashtag had emerged. It was trending in multiple countries. People were using it to share their own stories about tourist behavior, both good and bad. The hashtag had generated hundreds of thousands of posts in just a few hours. Her incident had sparked a movement, a collective discussion about being better tourists, more respectful visitors, more conscious travelers. Some defenders did emerge, though they were vastly outnumbered. A few people argued that the response from the internet was too harsh, that everyone makes mistakes, that she was being bullied. These comments usually got ratioed, with many more replies explaining why this particular mistake deserved the criticism it was getting. The court of public opinion had delivered its verdict, and appeals were falling on deaf ears. Psychology experts were even weighing in, explaining the phenomenon of tourists behaving differently abroad than they would at home. Articles explored why people feel emboldened to cross boundaries when traveling, why the normal rules seem to not apply. Her case was being used as a textbook example of this psychological effect, studied and analyzed by people she'd never meet. The video had made its way to television. Morning shows were discussing it. Evening news programs were using it in broader segments about tourism and cultural respect. Late-night talk shows were making jokes about it. Her face and her moment of regret were being broadcast to millions of additional people who might not have seen it online. International reactions varied by culture. In some countries, commenters were particularly harsh, coming from societies where respect for authority and tradition is deeply ingrained. In others, the discussion focused more on the general concept of being a respectful tourist. But across all cultures and languages, the basic sentiment was the same. She'd crossed a line and deserved what happened. Some content creators made longer analysis videos, 10 to 15 minutes breaking down everything wrong with her behavior. These videos were getting hundreds of thousands of views themselves. People were treating the incident like a case study, pausing at different moments to explain what she should have done differently. The educational content spawned by her mistake was ironically becoming valuable, teaching others what she'd failed to learn. Companies that made travel guides and apps were updating their content, adding specific sections about respecting ceremonial guards. Some explicitly mentioned her incident as a reason for the new guidelines. She'd literally changed how tourism information was being presented, though not in any way she would have wanted. The discussion had reached academic circles, too. Professors were assigning the video as a case study in courses about tourism, cultural studies, and social media. Students were writing papers analyzing the incident from various perspectives. Her 15 minutes of fame had turned into a permanent fixture in discussions about modern tourism culture. As the day turned to evening and then night, the engagement showed no signs of slowing. If anything, it was gaining momentum. The video was being translated, subtitled in different languages, discussed in forums she'd never heard of. Her mistake had become global property, analyzed and judged by the entire connected world. And somewhere in a hotel room in London, she watched it all unfold on a cracked phone screen, unable to stop it, unable to control it, unable to do anything but witness the full force of the internet's judgment. She sat in her hotel room that night, unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling as the weight of everything pressed down on her. Her friends had gone to their own rooms, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional buzz of her damaged phone receiving yet another notification. She'd stopped looking hours ago, but the buzzing continued like a heartbeat, reminding her that out there in the digital world, the judgment was still flowing. The next morning came with a decision. She couldn't hide from this. She couldn't delete her accounts and pretend it never happened. The videos were everywhere, permanent fixtures on the internet that would exist long after she'd deleted her own profiles. The only path forward was to face it directly, own her mistake, and try to make whatever amends were possible. She spent hours crafting her apology, writing and rewriting every sentence. It needed to be genuine, not defensive. Apologetic, not excuse-making. She needed to show she understood what she'd done wrong, why it was wrong, and what she'd learned. Her friends read multiple drafts, offering suggestions, helping her strike the right tone. This wasn't about managing her image anymore. It was about taking responsibility. The final version was simple and direct. She acknowledged her behavior was disrespectful and ignorant. She explained that she genuinely misunderstood the role and significance of the Royal Guards, but that misunderstanding was no excuse. She'd treated a trained soldier like a prop for her entertainment, and that was wrong regardless of her intentions. She apologized to the Guard, to the British people, to military personnel everywhere, and to anyone who'd been offended by her actions. She talked about what she'd learned in the aftermath, how she'd researched the history and training of the Guards, understanding now the honor and responsibility of their position, how she'd read comments from veterans and active military personnel, gaining perspective she'd lacked before, how this experience had taught her a painful but necessary lesson about cultural respect and the consequences of seeking attention at others' expense. The apology ended with a commitment to do better, to be a more respectful traveler, and to think about the impact of her actions on others. She acknowledged that words couldn't undo what happened, but she hoped her public acknowledgement of wrongdoing might at least demonstrate genuine remorse and personal growth. She posted it simultaneously across all her platforms. Then she waited. The response was mixed, exactly as she'd expected. Some people appreciated the apology, acknowledging that it took courage to own such a public mistake. They commended her for not making excuses, for taking full responsibility, for showing she'd actually learned something from the experience. But many weren't ready to forgive. Comments poured in saying the apology was too little, too late, that she was only sorry because she got caught, only apologetic because of the backlash. Some accused her of trying to rehab her image without genuine remorse. Others said no apology could undo the disrespect she'd shown. The internet, once united in judgment, was now divided in its response to her contrition. News outlets picked up the apology, adding it to their ongoing coverage of the incident. Tourist who mocked guard issues apology, read one headline. Viral video star apologizes for disrespectful behavior, read another. The story had evolved, gained a new chapter, but it was still very much alive. Her apology had given it fresh momentum rather than putting it to rest. She started receiving direct messages from unexpected sources. A few veterans reached out privately, appreciating her apology and offering words of encouragement about learning from mistakes. A British teacher asked if she'd be willing to have her story used as an educational tool in citizenship classes. A travel blogger suggested she write about the experience from her perspective, turning the lesson into something that might help others. The professional consequences she'd feared materialized. Her boss called for a video meeting. The conversation was difficult but necessary. The company had received complaints their social media had been targeted, and they needed to address it. They weren't firing her, but there would be consequences. She'd be removed from public-facing projects for a while. She'd need to undergo additional training. Her actions had reflected poorly on the company, and there needed to be accountability. She accepted everything without argument. She'd earned these consequences. The company was actually being more lenient than they could have been. In another situation with another employer, she might have lost her job entirely. This was mercy, and she recognized it as such. She thanked her boss for the opportunity to make things right and promised to prove she'd learned from this. Returning home to California was surreal. People at the airport recognized her, though most pretended they didn't. She could see it in their eyes, that flicker of recognition followed by a quick look away. She'd become that person, the one from the video, the cautionary tale. Walking through her own city felt different now, colored by the knowledge that strangers might know her face from the worst moment of her life. Her family had seen everything. The conversations were painful but necessary. Her parents were disappointed, not in an angry way, but in that worse way where you can see they're hurt because they raised you to know better. Her siblings were supportive but honest, not sugarcoating how badly she'd messed up. These conversations, face-to-face with people who loved her, somehow hurt more than the thousands of angry comments from strangers. Weeks passed, then months. The video never really went away. It would resurface periodically when someone new discovered it, or when it became relevant to a current discussion about tourist behavior. Her name remained attached to it, a permanent part of her digital footprint. Future employers would find it. Future dates might come across it. It was part of her story now, forever. But something else happened too. She did change. The experience had shaken something fundamental in how she approached the world. She became more thoughtful about her actions, more considerate of how her behavior affected others. When she traveled again, she researched cultural norms extensively. She read about local customs, learned basic phrases in the local language, approached new places with humility and respect. She volunteered with organizations that promoted responsible tourism. She shared her story, not to make excuses but to help others avoid making similar mistakes. She spoke at a few small events about the importance of cultural sensitivity, always leading with what she'd done wrong and why it mattered. If she had to carry this experience with her forever, she was determined to extract every possible lesson from it. The video still circulated. People still used it as an example. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she sometimes looked at the comments. They still hurt even months later, but mixed in with the harsh judgments were occasional notes that gave her hope. People saying they'd changed their own behavior after seeing her video. Travelers who'd thought twice before doing something disrespectful. Parents who'd used her story to teach their kids about consequences. Her story had become bigger than her. It existed in the collective consciousness as a modern parable about instant karma, about respect, about thinking before acting. She wasn't proud of why it existed, but she'd come to accept that maybe something good had emerged from her terrible judgment. If even one person treated a guard with more respect because they'd seen what happened to her, then perhaps her humiliation had served a purpose. The cracked phone screen eventually got replaced. Her social media presence changed, becoming less about seeking attention and more about genuine sharing. Her follower count stabilized, a mix of people who'd forgiven her, people who found value in her changed perspective, and people who were just there to watch. She accepted all of it. A year later, she returned to London. Not for content, not for attention, but because she'd genuinely fallen in love with the city despite everything. She visited Windsor Castle again, her heart pounding as she approached. The guards stood at their posts, different individuals but the same tradition. She stayed far back, watched respectfully, and took one simple photo from an appropriate distance. Before leaving, she quietly asked a castle staff member if there was any way to send a written apology to the specific guard from that day. They couldn't guarantee it would reach him, but they took her letter. In it, she apologized again, more personally than her public statement. She thanked him for doing his job with such professionalism. She explained how that moment, as humiliating as it was, had taught her invaluable lessons about respect and consequences. She never knew if he received it or read it. But writing it felt important, necessary. It was closure for a chapter that would never fully close, but had at least evolved into something she could live with. The video would always exist. The mistake would always be part of her history. But so would the growth that came after, the lessons learned, the person she became because of it. Walking away from the castle that day, she felt different than she had a year before. Less confident, perhaps, but more aware. Less concerned with being noticed. More focused on being respectful. The scar of that experience would always be there, but scars are proof of healing. She'd survived her worst moment being broadcast to millions. She'd faced the internet's judgment and come out the other side changed for the better.